Thank you for joining us for another episode of Channel Revelations. I'm Ethan Fox, and I'm here with Micheila Sheldan, and we'll be spending the next couple of hours talking about ancient civilizations and wisdom from the guides that we can apply to our day-to-day understanding of the world that we live in today. As I always say, Micheila is a trans channel, but I don't discuss any of the topics or questions with her beforehand, just to make sure her conscious mind doesn't in any way interfere with the information. So we'll get started whenever you're ready.
All right.
Who are we speaking with today?
There are many present. We have the Council of Light. We are also connecting to the Telos, and we do have the Ant People also present.
Hey, tell me more about the Ant People. I know there's a lot of writings about them in ancient times and their role in the influencing of humanity. Who were they exactly?
We are inner earth beings. We are a collective primarily of Andromedan descent. However, on Earth, we have hybridized into a form more suitable to both research and explore the inner earth as well as remain on the surface at times when we were responsible for translating various teachings from our star system as well as many others. We consider ourselves somewhat like a cosmic antenna to Akashic information that we are able to translate into a variety of different both languages in terms of different time frames and dimensions and beings that we were intersecting with at the time, but also to leave behind what we believe is important historic information that various inter-earth tribes were able to take and utilize as they were building their own first communities that still retain energy and wisdom today.
Are these the same Ant People that the Hopi referred to as they interacted with them when they were in their underground caves?
Yes, we are.
And why are you called the Ant People? Do you look like ants or something to that nature, or is it some other reason?
Yes, there is a familiarity, we believe, to the insects that you now recognize as ants. However, when we hybridize into the form that we are known as ant people, we became much smaller in size, which is quite different than what many of you would understand in terms of hybridization and energy. But we operate very differently than many of the other hybrids that you would know, for example, as giants. In our translation of energy to form, we became very efficient and compact in our ability to utilize that energy in a material sense, meaning we were small enough to move between various layers and levels of the inner earth while also retaining an energy that was prominent enough to be able to communicate and intersect with human beings at the time. Now, the construction or the configuration of our form is also very simplistic in nature, and that is another advantage that we believe we've had as we've continued our evolutionary process here on Earth, because we are very much like other races, shapeshifters in a sense, because we are able to utilize our very compact and transparent form to move between dimensions and to receive information from various planets and star systems that we are able to connect and merge for the purpose of training and teaching others. And we do this in such a way that we retain a certain amount of plasma. We know a topic that you have discussed often in these transmissions. Our energy fields, in other words, are far more expansive than our actual material manifestation. And this is very similar to many of the inner earth beings today that you would consider fairies, for example, who are able to move between different realms and to appear at a moment's notice in somewhat a material fashion.
Now, when you say compact form, so you had some sort of physical structure, I assume, and so would you say you were 3 feet, 4 feet, what relative to human size during today, modern times? What was the size of that?
Much smaller, we would say, even beyond that 4 feet range, only because what we were working with more so was light than material, and this was more our focus. And of course, in the analogy of comparing us to an ant tribe, for example, we had a certain telepathic or sentient connection to each other, very reminiscent of how these insects operate on the earth when they are both constructing some type of habitual form in which they are yet to converge, or whether they are traveling to pilgrimage forth in a different area more suitable to their sustenance, for example. We are very telepathic and somewhat work like an antenna in terms of keeping our collective very organized and functioning in unison as one.
So you came to Earth and you hybridized. Now on Andromeda, are there still Andromedans on Andromeda?
Yeah, oh yes, there are, but they would appear quite different than we do on planet Earth. As a matter of fact, Andromeda has evolved quite rapidly to the point where there are various different forms of beings that exist in different dimensions, some in various material stages of density and others assuming more of their light. And ultimately, what Andromeda has experienced is a merging of various cosmic genetic templates and races. So, very much like the melting pot that you consider humanity, Andromeda has become somewhat a replica of that in a cosmic sense.
And what dimensional space were the Andromedans in who originally came to Earth and became the ant people?
Well, we can take our lineage on Earth back to the original seeding event in which humans were formed. However, we did not take a very active role as the ant people that you now come to know us as at that time, meaning many Andromedans had come in a 12th dimensional state in order to lend themselves to the seeding of a new intergalactic race, and in so doing had to manifest into a more hybrid form. However, this was not a compact form, much like ourselves. What many of us who are considered the ant people decided upon was to take on an assignment to truly understand the inner workings of your planet, especially how beneath the crust or the soil of the earth, entire dimensional areas were able to be tapped into and observed. Many of us believed that we were the original seeders who came to form a new human race, when in fact, some of us later on began to understand that that seeding had happened before, prior to our arrival, which we know seems confusing, but what we want to share is that within the core of every planet, within the core of every star, is its origins, and that origins is an intergalactic conversion of the genetic template of all that has gone before it. So we realized that we were able to tap into our own Andromedan history within your planet, and realized that Andromedans had come long before the seeding event and were living within the core in order to experience a different planet, a different opportunity to evolve themselves. And this is ultimately the framework of our teachings. So many think that we are very focused on Earth, and we are. We helped many of the very early native tribes to better understand the Earth's elements and how to utilize them as an agent and tool of manifestation, while at the same time helping them to realize the wisdom that existed within Earth herself. So the Earth is somewhat like a portal. a multidimensional playing field that spans every inch of this universe's creative history. And this is something that we still are enamored with today and continue to explore.
Why did the Andromedans choose an inner Earth experience? Now, I know reptilians prefer higher dense environments, and if I'm understanding correctly, you're saying that the physical structure of Andromedans were more dense anyway. Is there some correlation there, or why did they choose that particular existence?
It has less to do with the structure and more to do with a preference of our assignments. In other words, we are very interested in understanding the inner workings of a planet and its consciousness, especially how energy flows within a certain planet or star, and how that flow of energy can be capitalized on in order to both manifest, but more so to also become so connected to it that we are utilizing it for our highest benefit. And in Andromeda, what we learned was as we move between various cosmic locations, we were apt to shift our energy quite dramatically. And we became very good at this. In other words, we are very adaptable to various planets, dimensions, energetic densities, and vibrations. And we use that to our advantage. So within the inner Earth, it's not so much that we're concerned we have to be within a material density in order to preserve our genetics, but we're able to adapt in such a way that we can move through the various layers and realms that exist within Gaia, and we can learn things that many other beings aren't able to tap into.
On Andromeda today, or in this time, is there a third dimension there, or a third or fifth dimension?
In Andromeda, we have evolved well beyond the third and even the fifth dimension. We consider ourselves to be more multidimensional, but somewhat resonating between the eighth and the ninth dimension, even though we do have councils and elders that emanate in the 12th dimension, as every planet does. At the same time, we want to acknowledge that there was a time in Andromeda where the third and even the fifth dimensions were a very bustling and creative vibratory container in which we thrived. And many of the technologies even and modalities that were created in these dimensions were taken and fine-tuned and still operate today in a more expansive version of themselves. So we have great reverence for this period or these periods on Andromeda, which is quite different, we believe, than the way humanity is perceiving its current dimensional shift.
Okay, so let's discuss that for a moment. Now, in previous conversations, we talked about how the third dimension on Earth got derailed, and that's why it ended up being such a harsh environment today. But that if we had made different choices as a collective up to this point, the third dimension could have been a very uplifting, positive, empowering place. So relate that to me to what the third dimension was like on Andromeda. Was it a similar kind of experience, or had your collective actually made better choices, in a manner of speaking, and produced a better society?
We do want to comment on the choices and especially what the third dimension would have been like in Andromeda. But we first want to speak to our very unique assignment and how we understand the evolution of your third dimension, especially related to the flow of energy, because this is what we have truly observed as we have been a part of your inner Earth experience. And many negate the idea that Earth and humans are actually working together in order to support a creative container like a dimension. But it is truly the case that within you is a built-in mechanism to exchange energy and information with the consciousness of your planet in such a way that evolution is happening consistently within each living being. And that is one of the biggest differences we think that we would note between what's happened in your third dimension here and what happened in Andromeda. Because regardless of the hierarchical influences and much of what's been created in the third dimension, our biggest concern is that you lost a very tangible connection with the inner earth, which we could simply describe as resonance or having the ability to unify as one. So, for example, when we are referred to lovingly as the ant people, and we say that we have a very strong antenna that keeps us operating as a one collective, that is always to our benefit, regardless of the circumstances that we find ourselves in. Even though we are individuals, we hear and feel the call and the need of every other being that exists within our collective. And we utilize that as the premise upon which we contribute to that collective. Well, on planet Earth, that is what became broken. Many of you were somewhat tethered to this beautiful energetic matrix within Earth through your DNA that brought in an organic calling that was based upon a response. A need would go out, and naturally, within each one of you, there is something that you are meant to supply in order to fulfill that need. But when that system of communication becomes deliberately broken, beings begin acting only in their best interest. And sometimes it is easily swayed by the minds of others in order to look a certain way. So perhaps what we're saying is our third dimension in Andromeda would have been a bit more unified in its creative contribution, even though it was still very material. And even though we were individuals in a sense, having an individual structure and knowing, of course, that we were not a unified energetic collective, but we still maintained this beautiful and elemental connection to our planet. And it's somewhat like a sounding board. When energy flows between a planet and an individual being, it is accounting for every other individual being that it connects to. And so we think this is truly why you're moving into a higher dimension right now, because there are so many who've reconnected themselves to the inner earth core, to Gaia, to her messaging, and are beginning to feel this need to be of service or to somehow be purposeful. And that need is truly coming from this beautiful reassembly or reconnection that we've been observing with great awe. At the same time, we think it's difficult for you to put it into some semblance of logical framework right now, because not everyone is connected fully in the same way. But that is coming, and we have great hope for that. So in our civilization, we created technologies like ships, for example, plasma, as well as material physical ships that could time travel and move between dimensions. And this was in a third dimensional reality. We used what many of you would now refer to as free energy, and this was more the norm for us. Even in Andromeda, we do work with bodies of water, the water substance and structure being a bit different than what you're used to on planet Earth, but we would harness that for healing, for example. And these were very physical things, and we came to realize that there was an energetic component within them, which is ultimately what moved us and them into a higher and higher dimension. So we took these very material manifestations that benefited everyone equally, and we began to upgrade them more and more as we would raise in dimensions. So today we might say that some of those technologies are more non-physical than they would have presented in a material fashion. Even our bodies, for example, in a material sense, have changed. There's been an beautiful and elaborate fusion between our energy structures and our physical structures. We are far more efficient in how we, for example, generate energy and how we are able to direct it. So these are the things we have learned. It's not that much different, we believe, from your own creative ability, but it's been more in a unified and balanced sense.
Now, in terms of, so you had all these advanced technologies that you mentioned. What about health and longevity? Was there, where on Earth today we have a medical system that seems to keep people in a state of illness? Is that a third dimensional characteristic, or in your third dimensional reality, was everybody in optimal health all the time, and did lifespans extend infinitely?
In Andromeda, we look at the concept of health very differently than you do here on the physical Earth. The main difference, we believe, is that you're zeroing in so exactly on areas that you believe of the body that are causing harm. For example, if there is a cyst, this cyst is responsible for a cancer, or if there's an anomaly in the heart that is responsible for the heart attack, when in fact, this has never truly been a part of our experience, even from the beginning of time, mainly because we've always looked at the body and the energy signature of our body as one, and knew that it was more efficient to measure the energy than it was to look at material. Not to say that we disregard the importance of a material structure, but what we know is that material is actually vibrating light. And if that vibration is somewhere off, then the material itself is going to come to a crisis. Now, we are not always looking for the problem necessarily. Even in the third dimension, our Andromedan mindset was always more on assuming the best and most balanced energetic vibration that we could, and studying where certain Andromedans may have developed an imbalance in their material bodies and why that happens. So we have a lot of data, in other words, that's quite different than the data or the research that takes place here on the Earth, because typically there's a reason that this scientific procedure that you call research is taken on. And that reason in its integrity always has to be examined. We, as a more unified collective in the third dimension, didn't necessarily have to worry so much about lack of integrity in terms of our research. We were always wanting to keep track and understand where our vibrations were changing and where we saw certain anomalies. And we can give one example about a more collective incident that caused us great concern, and how we moved out of it. And this had to do with radiation, for example, as there were many cosmic wars that took place throughout the universe, and Andromeda was not void of the interference of those chemicals and toxins, quite different perhaps than what you experience on your planet today. What we learned, however, was that the more we would sustain our energetic balance, the more the physical material would fall in line with that balance, meaning it would efficiently seek out anything that did not belong and try to eradicate it or move it out of the physical body. We use light therapies quite often in Andromeda. They would be very different technologically from the light therapies that you've adopted today. Ours operate more in a sonic sense, and we're drawing from the universe, not generating light in any type of false configuration. But we have used those very successfully to heal our collective of any of this toxic radiation, we might call it. We're focused more on stimulating the actual vibration of what you would call a cell, which we have a similar manifestation of, but we would say operates more like a collective, for example, like your bodily water. We are more plasmic, so we use plasma as the target for that light. And what we've been able to change and generate in our plasma has taken the body into higher and higher dimensions. So certainly we think longevity is important, but we don't use time or measurement in a linear sense anymore. It's not even something in the third dimension that we were overly concerned with. So our focus, even in a material dimension, has always been more energetic in nature.
So when you were in the third dimension, you perceived time, but you didn't really regard time as an important thing to consider.
Yes, and this is why very early on in Andromeda, the beings who are there are trained in the understanding that they are evolutionary beings, and this is not the only life that they are focused in. There are many others that are ongoing simultaneously, and because of that, there isn't an overwhelming need to extend life, and we think ultimately life is extended because of that premise. There is absolutely no attention put on lifespan, nor is there resistance to it. And because of this, beings accept that there is a certain contractual agreement that they have made cosmically and within their own Andromedan families to be in a body or in a non-physical state for as long as necessary. And sometimes that can be thousands of years. And in other times it might be hundreds of years. But we certainly do sustain ourselves far longer in linear terms and years than humans do.
What about monetary exchange? Here on Earth, we have a monetary system that is controlled by a handful of people that essentially have all the abundance, and we essentially are the majority of people are sort of slaves of that system, but we use it as a means of exchanging value for the work that we do or things that we produce. What was that like on Andromeda when you were in the third dimension?
In the third dimension, we have never recognized a need for any formal mode of material exchange, ultimately because if we were all driven to do what we knew was important for our soul's contribution, there was an always reciprocity there in terms of some type of reward. But we don't operate on a monetary system in any sense of the word. In the third dimension, we are supplied with what we need in a communal sense. And Andromedans in the third dimension, we could say we're very tribal or communal beings, not to say that we were not concerned with the entire collective. Yet Andromedan families, they tend to be very large in number and go well beyond what you would consider a traditional blood family here on planet Earth. Because our race lives to such a long length of time and are on the planet for that period, you can imagine the number of children and grandchildren and friendships and loved ones. And these communities are self-sufficient. They operate very well within each other. In the third dimension, there was definitely some material exchange between communities. But this had more to do with inviting others in and offering demonstrations of what was possible for them to take back and utilize within their own community. Sometimes this involved sending groups of Andromedans back to their tribal location with various samples or even seeds, for example, that could be planted within what you call soil, and we actually recognize as more of a plasmic energetic substance. At the same time, we note that wisdom and the exchange of knowledge has always been most revered in our star system and in many others. So the highest echelon of value is placed upon experience and how that experience is cultivated, what a tribe or a community has come to know. And those communities tend to be the ones who are taking mentorship roles in training others, and actually overproduce and do not need to retain all that is produced for consumption. So exchange does happen, but it's more of what you might call a sharing economy, where there is so much overabundance and so much prosperity within communities that are focused on different things, that a natural flow or format of sharing those things has begun. And there is measurement of this, interestingly enough, because as Andromedans, as we have mentioned, we are so enthralled with research and charting and watching the dynamic changes that take place within our race, that we've noticed we are becoming more and more prosperous as this model grows. So even as we moved from the third to the fourth to the fifth dimension, this system, it didn't necessarily change or even become restricted through the transition. It actually grew in such a way that vibration carried it even further. So we have a natural, we'll say, flow of exchange that is taking place in an organic way that goes well beyond the need for some type of monetary value.
Okay, to backtrack a little bit, you mentioned earlier that you really didn't consider time to be all that important. Therefore, lifespans were not something you considered as worth considering. But you just mentioned that your lifespans were considerably longer. So even though you weren't really considering time as an important factor, would you say on the whole your race, when you were in the third dimension, had considerably longer lifespans than we do on Earth?
Oh, most definitely. Most definitely we did. And we believe that that's because we were always focused on energy, even in the third dimension, which is a bit of a misnomer. And we want to clear this up, because we see many humans today focused on the third dimension in such a way that those who are there have no consideration of energy. We believe you are working with energy in the third dimension. It is just that it has been suppressed, the idea of it, to such a degree that many are not even realizing how much energy they have access to. So it's not that you're not working with energy in the third dimension, but in the third dimension that you've created on Earth, or has been created for you, we might say, there is a lack of focus or importance put upon that. And that was not the case in Andromeda. And we think this is why our lifespans were so much longer. And as we have mentioned, or you have asked about physical health, for example, we think this is why we have been able to live far beyond human beings in this timeline, simply because when you're focused on energy, you are not so much in resistance of changes that are taking place within the body. So we really want to clarify that it's not that we didn't experience forms of disease or even periods of pain or discomfort. In a third dimensional material reality, we think these things are always going to take shape somehow. And for us, certainly it did. But we did not have the immediate fear or concern about the physical material shifts or discomforts that we were feeling, and went straight to our energetic practices in order to transmute them. It is not to say that we were transmuting them because they were wrong. In fact, we simply looked at transition in the material form as something just as revered as anything else. We knew and were actually taught by our ancestors that if we were to make the transition from one dimension to the next, higher and higher and higher, we would have to go through alchemy time and time again, and we were willing to do that regardless of what that alchemy required. And we find that humans are in one of the most important states of alchemy currently with the physical body that they could ever undertake, but it is being looked at with such disregard. It's somehow being misled to be placed in a lower dimensional expression such that there is a bodily crisis that is happening, when in fact, if you could raise your potential to what ours was in the third dimension, considering that the body is going through alchemy and must transform, and focused on things like energetic balance or trying to rejuvenate the amount of light that you are working with from an energetic sense, regardless of the discomfort you face, you may find yourself going through this time with far more peace, which was ultimately our experience and something that we still teach today.
On Earth, one of the things that seems to divide us and prevent us from working together as a collective is our political system. And so globally, people vote for their leaders to decide what to do. And also this leads to many social causes and things like that as well that divide people. When you were in the third dimension, did you have leaders? And if so, how did you choose as a collective who would lead and make decisions on behalf of the group?
Well, one of the reasons that we have such a strong relationship with tribes on Earth, like the Hopi, for example, is that Andromedans, very early in their history and even in the third dimension, operate in a very tribal sense. It's truly been our origins and our natural propensity to not elect leaders so much, but to revere our elders and to be ordained or initiated into some position of the tribe that was of great importance, meaning that there was no one in the tribe, regardless of their stature or creativity, that was held to any more responsibility than any other. Even in the tribes on planet Earth today, while the elders are revered, the future generations are just as much looked at with great potential. So it evens out the playing field. We do not today necessarily have any type of governmental structure like you do. However, we have to point out that in a communal or tribal sense, it is the natural evolution of those who are the oldest or revered as elders to set the tone for mediation, which naturally has to happen at times because even today there can be disagreement between directions to go and things to create within certain communities. There has to be some type of extension into other tribes and making connections and communicating with those tribes. And sometimes there are certain individuals that are appointed to those positions. It is not necessarily that they have more power. It is not that they are elected in order to rise above the people, but they are put in those positions because of a certain level of, we'll say, humbleness or ability to speak on behalf of the whole. There are also cultivated in our youth various teachings and themes having to do with predisposition to certain tasks or activities. What we believe and what we've trained in many of the tribes on your earth is that every soul that comes into a community has both requested to be there for a specific purpose and has been called upon by those in the tribe to become a part. And just that idea tends to erase any form of hierarchy or feeling of inequality, because from a very early age, there is this feeling of belonging. A newborn child is ceremonially revered and prepared to be a part of the tribe in the way that they fit best. And certain tribal leaders would use energetic tools of divination, for example, looking at the placement of the planets and the stars and make a determination as to the value that this individual child was bringing to the whole. There was more of a welcoming, in other words, on behalf of all. And that welcome set the tone for how government structure still takes place today. It's not unusual in Andromeda, like it is not in other cosmic locations, for councils to form. Yet in Andromeda, a council is not stagnant, it is always fluctuating, meaning if there is a problem that arises within Andromeda, a council may come together based upon the unique contribution of the beings that make it up and how they are able to address that problem. So we are not held back by governmental structure whatsoever. We think that the councils that form and the various beings that rise to positions of what you may call power that we simply see as representatives are very in tune with what the collective desires for the whole.
It seems that Earth has been sort of a melting pot of different races. Now we're talking about the Andromedans also having been part of that influence on Earth. And of course, in previous conversations, we've talked about everything from reptilians, the Anunnaki, to the Syrians, and many others. Was Andromeda like that in that there were a lot of other races living there other than the Andromedans, or was it just your singular race?
Every single race in this universe was seeded from another. Yet that seeding is very unique to the star system or planet that we are speaking to. And in Andromeda, certainly when it first came into being, the consciousness of Andromeda itself called out for the assistance of many others to come and to support a brand new race. But for a very long period of time, Andromeda was seeded not with beings similar to you or even to the ant people as we present ourselves today, but more in a sense or a likeness to nature. So Andromeda existed at the very beginning for a long period of time as more of a plant-based natural environment with a variety of different seedings coming together and hybridizing from various planets. Later in its evolution, beings began to inhabit Andromeda and hybridize themselves. But it was not a great many, not as many as we believe, inhabited Earth at the beginning of time. In fact, Andromedans, we believe we come more from the fauna and flora of the universe than actually other cosmic races. And we do consider the flora and the fauna, the elementals and the plants to be a consciousness in and of themselves. So these are more our founding fathers and mothers than any being or race. We do acknowledge that a great many collectives and races take interest in being a part of our reality, and we welcome them with open arms. However, in terms of a melting pot, we believe it's been more an evolution of our own race than it has been the interaction with others. And this is mainly because of how quickly we have evolved as beings, and especially the format that our structure takes, which is somewhat different than humans and others. In other words, if we were to get into a great detail on this, it would take some time. But our DNA, not unlike any other being who has DNA, exists in more of a rounded format than a spiral. And because of that, we don't have a great deal of interference from other beings in our hybridization process like you do. It's quite unusual, and it's actually one of the characteristics of our races that is completely different than any other. We revere it because it operates more universally, even though your DNA has a universal component and certainly relates to the spiral vibration that is the great spiral of time. In a circular fashion, our DNA merges somewhat like a portal into itself and is able to capitalize on history very quickly. So we are different in our integration of Akashic records and how we're able to tap into them. It is almost immediate. So it's easy for us to transmute anything that gets in the way of our DNA. We are very accelerated, we might say, in our transmutation, which doesn't leave a great deal of space for holding on to traumas or carrying the patterns of past, in other words. It's a different sort of storage that we're working with, and it is quite efficient.
If you're more connected to the flora and fauna, what physical form did you take when you were in the third dimension? Obviously not the ant people that we know of you on Earth.
Well, it is to describe the material format that we were in, would be to look at the way that your plants have evolved today. They are each a bit different and certainly working with energy differently as well. We carried a material resonance and we did have bodies. Those bodies were a bit more translucent than the skin and bone that you're operating today. At the same time, we did draw from our planet the energy that was necessary to keep us very vital and using our material energy wisely. And this is somewhat like the seasons that your plants and nature go through today, where there were times of material dormancy and times in which our material became more the focus. Just like the leaves would blossom on a tree, we might find that transparency about our bodies would change to a certain color, for example, or become a bit thicker in its material presentation. And this allowed us the time and the opportunity to attend to those physical forms and to also revere them. We also took more of a physical shape, somewhat like what you see as an insect, having a various body that is not, well, it is in symmetry, we believe, oftentimes in symmetry, but also being able to regenerate itself. We're referring somewhat to a cocoon and the move of the caterpillar to the butterfly. At times, like the snake sheds its skin, our physical bodies were able to also shed its outer layer to transform itself in a third dimensional sense.
How would you explain? I've seen other channels depict Andromedans as being more humanoid in nature. Are they misinterpreting the information they're channeling, or is there some other form of Andromedan that looks that way? Because what you're describing appears to be more of like an insect that had certain plant qualities to it.
Well, it's not to say that an Andromedan could not present itself in a humanoid fashion. So oftentimes when a channel or someone who is time traveling is interacting with an Andromedan, they are translating the energy of that Andromedan to what it might feel like or be like to be in contact with it. At the same time, we are shapeshifters and we will take on the likeness of the being that we are translating with. In the third dimension, while we are more presenting like an insect or nature, we also took on various qualities as we evolved that may be considered humanoid, although we can't necessarily say that it would be as closely connected as you were. For example, hair is one of the things we might speak to. While you have hair, and certainly we also use an antenna-like substance that could be considered hair, our hair is not a more important or prominent part of our structure. We don't even have bodily hair, for example. We are more of a smooth substance that is easily able to intersect with the inner earth if we are here, for example, or to move between various dimensions. We alluded to the idea that we operate more in our plasma, and plasma has the ability to transform into whatever is necessary for it to be. So we do not doubt that there are Andromedans that humans have been in contact with that seem more humanoid in their structure. Ultimately, we think that humans can become the same as Andromedans if they choose, and many of you have had the ability to shapeshift at will. It is just that you exist in a third dimensional reality in which that possibility has been somewhat suppressed. And at the same time, you have been trained into the idea that material is solid and unchangeable. And we grew up in a system of understanding that energy was what manifested our material. So our belief systems are a bit different in that way.
So if you didn't have hair in the way that we have hair, but something more antenna-like, what purpose does our hair serve, or does it serve any purpose other than just appearance?
We believe it's very similar in its extrasensitive capabilities, yet it has been modified on Earth in a more material format. So the hair that was present in Andromeda, for example, that we have referred to as more antenna-like, was thicker than the hair that is grown on your body or comes out of your head. And it was less dense in nature in terms of the amount because it was utilized more like a telepathic tuner for us. And this is why many of the native tribes were drawn to the understanding that the growth of their hair could mimic the same capabilities. And we believe that it can. Yet the way that your hair operates is a bit different than ours. The follicles of the hair that find themselves sprouting from internally within your structure are very sensitive electromagnetically based upon your nervous system. So in a moment of very intense stress or when there is an impending danger, what you may find is that the hair stands on end. And this is an internal response that you're immediately able to have an external stimuli or a relationship to. And there's a bit of a lag time also that takes place in the material third dimension on planet Earth between the hair in a human body standing up in the midst of some alert or intuitive message and when the intuitive message actually comes in. We were a bit more evolved in this sense, meaning we didn't have any lag time between them. And our hair-like antenna were not wired directly to our nervous system so much as they were collectively oriented. So just like you have heart resonance where you are coming into a unified field and more feeling the connection to each other, we were able to use our hair-like antennae to hold resonance in our star system or in our collective.
What's the impact then for human beings? Because we tend to cut our hair short in many cases, especially most men tend to have shorter hair, and some women also tend to have shorter hair. Is there some sort of an impact on our ability to use what you just described?
Well, what many of us believe is that your hair is also an extension of the wisdom that exists within your own DNA because your DNA is present within the hair. So many in tribal traditions would not cut the hair because they believed in doing so, they would not be able to fully retain the wisdom or the knowledge that they had cosmically assimilated through their DNA. And certainly there is a tie to intuition here as well. Do we think that is true? Well, it is not something that we believe must fully be adopted, and this is why. Your hair regenerates itself and is meant to. Now, we know that many of you will say you are losing hair or your hair is not regenerating itself. And that's ultimately an issue of your inability to physically thrive or the toxic environments that you have been living within. Because if the hair rejuvenates itself on a physical soul, meaning once it is cut, it can become longer again. We believe that the knowledge that is extending from the DNA through the new hair follicles is going to pick up the signal of anything that has been left behind or taken away, in other words. So we're not concerned about that part of it so much, but we do understand the traditions of those who want to preserve the hair for that reason. As an antenna or as a telepathic sensory tool, certainly leaving the hair at its longest length does have its benefits. And this is why the natives were trained to do this. Because the more hair that is present, the more that alert system in the physical material plane is able to be tapped into. Yet, it can be developed beyond a physical sense. So some of you are now utilizing your extra sensitive abilities to channel, to tap into your inner GPS. And it matters not if you were to cut your hair because you're not relying so much on the GPS system within the physical structure any longer. You're relying more on an innate connection that you are building between various realms. And we think that merits just as much importance as any of these traditions do.
Now, it seems like the Andromedans, when they were in the third dimension on Andromeda, were experiencing a much more utopia in terms of a society compared to what we experience in the third dimension on Earth. Now, is that because the human beings have been, in some respects, interfered with by many other collectives, such as the reptilians, the Anunnaki, and others, that sort of took us off track, and so we ended up manifesting a third dimension that in many respects is a very dystopian environment compared to what you're describing that you had? Is that difference that existed?
We absolutely agree with what you are saying here. It is not to say, however, that Andromeda has not gone through its fair share of cataclysms and difficult periods. At the same time, the influence of cosmic races has not been as strong on our planet as it has been on yours. And in fact, we think our level of consciousness, even in the third dimension, has been more accelerated than humans have. In other words, it hasn't been suppressed to the degree that your level of consciousness has. So even at times when we existed in a more material reality, we were still working with a higher consciousness that precluded us to not become or to succumb to the lower vibrations of those who would like to take ownership of our communities or even of our bodies. In fact, as we moved into the fifth dimension, what we began to realize was that the more we invited other cosmic races in, the stronger we became, because we were able to both recognize our differences as well as cherish them. And this is something that has not been the case on planet Earth. Your differences have become the reason for the decline of your society. And this has been a game, we believe, that has been played on you for a very long period of time. So moving through various civilizations and dimensions in Andromeda, a love and appreciation for the differences in cosmic races became the premise upon which they were invited in. And while we could appreciate them and we could share knowledge and information, we didn't have to worry so much about being hybridized by them or having to change ourselves or to change them. In other words, it was more of a symbiotic and complementary relationship. And we do want to say, those who associate the Andromedans with humanoids or hybrid human type beings may actually be tuning more into the fifth dimension, because ultimately this is where a great deal of that interaction took place with races like your own and others who take more of a humanoid type of presentation.
Now, if I'm understanding correctly, you had said that the Andromedans were one of the races that originally participated in the seeding of humanity on Earth. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so far, we've discussed several other races in previous conversations. And for example, the reptilians contributed the human mind that we have, although we've been moved too far in that direction in our evolution. But what did the Andromedans contribute to our genetic lineage?
Many of us contributed the idea of a chakra system, but especially the energetic flow through a chakra system. We are very interested in what humans might call stargates. And these are areas where Akashic information becomes accessed. And as energies flow through them, that Akashic information becomes integrated either within a soul or within a specific area of a planet or universe. And we took this idea of how stargates in the greater collective universe worked and brought them to Earth to be fused within you. Now, remember, our DNA operates a bit differently than yours. So our DNA is still a part of your configuration. And this is where that spiral or circular configuration actually comes in, because if you might recognize your chakras as portals or areas where a circular energy might exude from the body, this is a part of our contribution. We also became very involved in what others were contributing to that is now known as your human blueprint. Now, that blueprint is a visual type of configuration as to the hybridization process of humans. It is not a physical type of contribution, not to say that, of course, there wasn't a physical seeding. We were all here hybridized and interacting with each other, physically seeding human hybrids that evolved into human beings. At the same time, we knew that we wanted your race, and Earth wanted her race, to evolve without interference into something completely unique. So there were visual processes and discussions taking place about how the energy structure on humans would become slightly different than anything that had ever been seen before in the universe. And we think this is where a great deal of our contribution can be seen and is actually being put to use today. For example, some of the very early renderings of the chakra system and how the chakra system works and fits together may be an Andromedan interpretation of how our own chakra system and yours is so closely connected. We also are, we'll say, contributors to the energy suite that you are working with beyond the auric field. The aura being the closest energetic body to the physical body is also encased in a variety of other light bodies that all work in concert. This is something that we believe you have taken on as a part of our lineage.
In addition to that, many of these other races have also contributed different things to our modern third-dimensional society on the planet. For example, the Anunnaki have contributed our global financial system and hierarchical system and royal families and our political system that all evolved from the Anunnaki influence, including wars and that sort of influence. Now, reptilians seem to have contributed largely to our understanding of consciousness and spirituality and mind-based teachings such as meditation and so on. What, if any, role did the Andromedans play in the influence of humanity and our evolution that might still be prevalent today?
It's difficult for us to offer one area that's any more prominent than any other. At the same time, many of us were here in ancient civilizations and various forms of hybridization as teachers at times, but most of our focus had to do with the access between the earth and higher dimensions. For example, any time that a technology or a portal was constructed with some type of elaborate overlay, we may have been invited in to assimilate a landing area for ships, for example, or especially to evaluate within the inner earth various systems of energy flow and measurements to important ley lines and meridians. These teachings today are still left behind, but they aren't often attributed to us. We also have a great deal of influence in native cultures, especially having to do with the Earth's direction and using medicine wheels, for example, plugging into Earth energies. This is something that we're very used to doing on Andromeda that we've brought to planet Earth and we put into practice here. If you have ever seen an area cleared using some type of a spiral configuration where energies are flowing from the earth and humans are invited in to heal themselves in those energies, we have contributed and taught about these as well. So earthly technologies having to do with the connection to nature, or especially the various directions or elements, or tying those into certain planetary alignments. We are very adept at what today you might call astrology, although we know there are various forms of astrology that other cosmic families may have brought to planet Earth and helped to adopt here. We have been very interested in the movement of planets and stars and how they affect our own, whether they affect certain communities, our bodies, our evolutionary path, especially how our planet and planet Earth influence each other. We have become very enamored by the idea that we're always exchanging valuable information and history with each other. And we have brought that into the perfection of a symmetry or a certain program that can be relayed in teachings. So when you look at philosophers, great philosophers on your planet, for example, many of them were in contact with Andromedans, helping to download these systems and put them into some logical organization or use. Our minds tend to work this way. We are both energetic as well as physical in terms of understanding the relationships between different planets and their origins, and we help to train others in what we have learned.
Now, you said that you were the ant people on Earth. Now, when you were the ant people, I assume you were in the third dimension. So you came to Earth in a higher dimensional state, much like many of the other collectives did, and you entered the third dimension. Am I understanding correctly?
Not exactly, because as the ant people, we are resonating within the inner earth and we are multidimensional beings. So within the inner earth, all dimensions exist consecutively. And we came in more in a hybrid state, choosing to manifest in different dimensions. We think what you're asking us is, was the earth in a third dimensional state when we came to it? And certainly we can say, yes, that was the case, but it doesn't necessarily preclude our ability to resonate beyond it.
And you said you interacted with other collectives, I assume, or was it your own collective when you were asked to work on portals and landing zones and things like that? Was that such as the Anunnaki or reptilians? Or
Yes, in collaboration with many, we have been, and it is our pleasure to do so.
So you weren't entirely existing within the earth, and you did come to the surface for certain reasons.
Well, let us make a distinction here that the ant people are a very specific Andromedan collective that has manifested now in a different hybrid form. And Andromedans do still come to planet Earth and have been present in ancient civilizations, not so much in an ant form, but in different forms as well.
And what parts of the world, now we've in previous conversations talked about all the different civilizations around the earth, as well as the many archaeological sites that they left behind as well. Was there a particular area where the ant people preferred to stay? For example, reptilians typically preferred more dense environments such as mountaintops and inside the earth. Was there some region that they exist, or form of matter that they prefer to exist within?
We cannot necessarily say there is a region that we believe that is more conducive or not to our structure, but remembering that we are inner earth beings, it's important to acknowledge that we like to travel beneath the earth between various ley lines and meridians to the core. We also are very aware of entryways or gateways from the surface of the earth to the inner earth, and sometimes like to resonate in these areas where we can make contact with those who have been assigned to interact with us, either physically or energetically. And we prefer the inner earth simply because it is more conducive to the way that we are shape shifting and also very quickly evolving ourselves. Ultimately, we are generating a great deal of energy and light and information despite our very compact size. And because of that, it is more comfortable for us to be in an area with a great deal of energy that we are also able to resonate with equally and also tap into.
Now, according to my understanding of the Hopi stories, they have existed in the Arizona Grand Canyon area for thousands of years. And this was when they were describing the interaction with the ant people. Was that an area that the ant people concentrated in, or just one of them?
Well, it is one area, but keep in mind that this is an important area and it is historic for this very purpose. What we began to recognize was that the combination of elements in this area supported somewhat like a multidimensional gateway, meaning there was constant and open access between the earth and various other dimensions and beings, such that teachers were coming in to share wisdom about what they had created in their various collectives, and there were intergalactic beings that were taking a poem in these areas and sharing knowledge, as well as schools were developed here. But ultimately, the Grand Canyon and beneath it contains very sensitive and mystical areas where the earth has consolidated a great deal of energy, and these energy sources were deemed to be capable of healing, but also sustaining those who came in a light-based format. So they were chosen oftentimes by beings such as ourselves or many others because of the amount of light and energy that was possible of utilizing for whatever purpose was necessary. At the same time, there are natural and very intricate entryways from the surface of the earth that have been formed through elements and rock that allow access into certain inner earth cities and dimensional realities. These areas are so sensitive because if the wrong people were to traverse them, they would be able to change the earth in very dramatic ways. And it is not to say that it hasn't happened on the surface, but what we know is that the inner Earth's core is such a valuable configuration of various resources and elements and knowledge that to skew that would change the potential of your entire planet and entire race. So many of us existed here very early on simply because we wanted to ensure the purity of these areas, somewhat to guard them, but to also use them as go-betweens from the surface of the earth to areas where we could commune and share our research and knowledge, and to also open these areas to those who were of the highest integrity and wanted to better understand what existed beneath the surface and train those on the surface in what was taking place there. So much has happened through the span of multiple years within the inner earth that it is a fantastic thing to observe. And in our day, and when the Hopi was present there, these changes were something that we prophesized, and they are now coming to full fruition. So we might even say that there is a collective endeavor or assignment of people that come together to co-create there, who may be drawn to these areas specifically for their power.
Now, there are some structures on the surface in areas like in Arizona, for example. There's a structure that's sort of carved into the rock formations, but also has some sort of brick-like pattern or structure to it. One in particular called Montezuma's Castle, which doesn't have anything to do with Montezuma, but were these in any way connected to the ant people, or were these just human beings, or maybe even the Hopi who lived in these locations?
Many of these locations were constructed as passageways that were seeming to be home-like in nature, but not necessarily were to reside. In other words, great meetings would take place here between various cosmic collectives and tribes and earthly beings that were in the position of communicating and exchanging knowledge with each other. They were set up as interdimensional passageways for the purpose of moving between the surface and the inner earth. And some of us, not the ant people necessarily, but others who were revered as light teachers, later took possession of them and tried to keep humans from entering them because there was so much valuable, we'd say resource in terms of healing potential, the ability to move between various dimensions, and especially to access universal grids from these points or areas. So we cannot say necessarily that through time they were utilized or taken ownership by any one collective in particular. However, their original purpose and construction was for the purpose of meeting between cosmic locations and the earth.
Now, it seems like there's a certain kind of architecture that is somewhat commonplace in ancient sites in the United States, which is very similar to Montezuma's Castle. Another one is Mesa Verde, where we see these rock faces that are cut into, but then built almost like a building or home structure in front of it. These two are very similar. So when we see that kind of architecture, are we always dealing with the same kind of collectives that you're talking about right now?
We believe the symmetry and the similarity here is reminiscent of what you are speaking of and what we're alluding to. And we want to add to the idea that built into these structures were the capability, like a technology, to levitate or to utilize the energy field more powerfully in a material structure than what was possible anywhere else on the earth. So sometimes in a situation where a light being would come to earth, they would regenerate their energy in these various locations such that they could use it in a different fashion on a physical planet. We also see these being used as places of divination or prayer, especially for those who were ordained as tribal leaders, making the connection between higher realms.
And so, obviously, modern archaeologists believe these were just residences that more primitive people lived in. Was that they were just eventually adapted for that purpose, or was that just a complete misinterpretation?
Well, we think in general it would have been very difficult to reside in these areas in a material sense. They weren't necessarily built for that purpose, even though there may have been periods on Earth where human beings attempted to assume living quarters in these areas. We do not think it would have been extremely successful, simply due to the resonance in these places and how energy and material coincided. It would have been somewhat like constantly timeline jumping in your physical reality and not able to hold an attention on a specific, or your attention on a specific timeline. So even though we can agree that some beings would attempt to use these structures later on as valuable agents of their sustenance, it wasn't something that would have been a comfortable or successful endeavor.
Well, most of these sites also are located very high up in places that are hard for human beings to even get to, much like the reptilian ancient sites that they also created, which nowadays are monasteries that are also very hard to get to. Was that was there? What's a similarity there in that reptilians chose these locations that are often high up on cliffs or the sides of rock formations that are nearly impossible for the average human being to go to. And although these other sites like Montezuma's Castle and Mesa Verde are not quite that hard to get to, they still have that element there. Was that to prevent people from going to these locations?
Well, it wasn't the intention to prevent people from going to these locations because, as you had mentioned, they were very difficult to get to begin with. But what we want to reveal is that the actual access point to these locations exists within the mountainous range or structure itself, meaning there was a gateway or a tunnel, if you will, that was not fully carved in rock in a material sense, but had a natural clearing within which these structures were chosen or built. And these may have collapsed at some point or have been hidden, for example, from humanity. But nonetheless, the gateway or entry point to it would have been much lower to the ground than the actual structure seemed to be itself. But it would have taken a great many days on pilgrimage for a material being to walk through that gateway in order to get to the inner workings of the technology or the center itself. And this is why the intergalactics were so adept at using them. They weren't necessarily focused on the material ascent or descent in order to arrive. Remember, they were using energy differently. So they were shape shifting and time traveling and able to teleport themselves sometimes at will to these various areas where they would meet with beings who were coming in on ships or were in a plasmic state. We might see, for example, the great leader of a tribe on Earth being elevated by a light beam from a ship to meet with councils in these very areas and then dropped back to the surface of the Earth once the meeting was complete.
Yeah, the Hopi have many prophecies that they have shared with the world about the times that we're in today and the various changes that are coming. Were these conveyed to them originally by the ant people, or was it some other influence that they came upon that knowledge?
A combination of many, but certainly the influence of the ant people is primary in many of these philosophies, which are often very misunderstood, sometimes taken as the cataclysmic type of experience that humans would dread, when in fact were revered as times of transformation and potentials for rebirth.
Tell me more about that then, since what we know about the Hopi prophecies are conveyed from them, but maybe some of that has been lost in time. What were the prophecies intended to teach us or to share with us about the time that we're living in today?
Well, many of these times were mirrored in other star systems that both the Andromedans and others had been a part of throughout their evolutionary process. At the same time, what we came to know was it was inevitable that you would come to a point where the Earth would ascend to a specific level in which it would require all humans to review the timelines of the past in a very accelerated fashion. And ultimately, this is the prophecy that is being carried out right now, where you are in the midst of a renewal, but that renewal is somewhat like ascending beyond the earth into a heavenly dimension where your soul is able to review all of the lifetimes it has lived before and all of the things that have contaminated its creative process and purge those things for the benefit of a more clear and pure creative container. The earth itself was known to be a consciousness, and the earth's consciousness would also expand and grow to a point where vibration would have to bring the convergence of many timelines together that humans had been a part of, but also their cosmic families had been involved in. And this review is something that we know seems otherworldly and often materially difficult to go through, but it's ultimately taking place within your own DNA. So the convergence of many different planets and significant influences, including solar frequencies, are building to a point where it is inevitable the Earth is going to move entirely into a higher dimension. Yet these prophecies are not built upon the idea that it is inevitable you will get there. What these prophecies are saying is that each individual is contributing to the path and the timeline in which the earth takes, meaning if it is inevitably going to move into the fifth dimension, it can be a very quick and easy ride, or it can be a difficult process through which there is a great deal of suffering. And ultimately, what many of the Hopi prophecies are attempting to share is that you are the ones who are the ultimate driving factors of the prophecy itself. For a prophecy is not meant to be a linear prediction. It's meant to be a transmission through which each individual is able to vibrationally interpret its significance within its life. The Hopi knew that there would come a time where this prophecy would begin to awaken the minds and the hearts of humans to what the ancestors always knew, and it is that Earth has the capability to rise in its dimension to the degree and willingness and consciousness of those on the planet at the moment in time that it raises. And we are all here to assist that process. So if we come to the conclusion that the Earth is in a demise, then we are ultimately in the midst of some demise that we are prophesizing and putting into motion. If we choose to say that the Earth is merely in a transitional point, that we are all assimilating together, then we have now opened the space through which possibility can carry us in any way that we choose. As the ant people, what we have learned is that certain planetary alignments and plasmic injections and solar rays are measurable from an energetic standpoint. And we have seen similar times in Andromeda where we have felt somewhat out of control of our own evolution, where things have begun to move so quickly that we felt chaotic, and that we were not the driving force of our own evolution. And because of this, we have come to lay the foundation for what we know to be true. There is an intelligent universe and a process that is always supporting you if you will allow it.
And so, based on where we are today as a human civilization and the choices we've made, are we currently on the path to making that a more turbulent period of suffering as we transition to the fifth dimension, or have we actually, as a collective, made more positive choices, even though maybe on the surface it doesn't appear to be that way?
Well, regrettably, we believe you are suffering far more than you need to. And it is not something that we can determine what will be your future. You are the ones who are determining it in every moment. We can only look at the potentials that you've created and how they are vibrating. And because we are so adept at this, what we can say is there are two very distinct timeline paths or avenues through which the earth will transition. One is a more slow and painful transition through which the third dimension will hold on to a great degree, and many who exist there will continue to suffer. And another involves great ease and flow and joy and creativity, where there is less resistance to what is being left behind, and truly more focus on where you are going. If we were to evaluate right now the possibility of each of these timelines, we couldn't give it to you in a collective sense. We would have to do it in an individual way. And this is why your race has somewhat been divided in terms of your dimensional possibility or potential. It's a very unusual type of experience that you are having that doesn't happen quite often within the universe. Even though we have gone through our own transition in Andromeda, similar to what you're experiencing now, we did not have as much division and as much resistance as what you have today. And because of that, took the easier route, or the more accelerated and joyful creative path, where some of you may experience one and some may experience the other simultaneously. That is truly what we see happening right now, is within each human to a certain degree. There is a choice being made right now to take one path or the other. Now, some of you have come to the conclusion that a certain threshold of people or percentage or number of humans will override those who are not choosing the easier path, and make the leap for them. And we do think that is somewhat possible. At the same time, we're not necessarily seeing that critical mass right now being the determining factor in a timeline jump. It would take a great deal or great number of people in order to override or cancel out the free will of others to make a leap into the fifth dimension so profound that there wouldn't be any discomfort. But we're very hopeful, and this is why. And we want to go back to what we've said previously about this prophecy, which is actually speaking to an intelligent process of the universe. And what we've come to know is that the universe is always working for us, meaning it's reviewing what's happening energetically and always making adjustments for the highest and best outcome. And that means that regardless of how many people choose the easy path, those that are on the hard one are going to receive the vibrational assistance that they need to make that shift. It's not up to you in order to change that. It is ultimately a function of what we call universe, and some may refer to as God or creator, to assist others along in the best way possible. So every day, in every moment, every human is receiving what they need to take that highest and best path. It is just the degree to which it is accepted that we cannot truly comprehend.
So, in any way, did the Andromedans assist or play a part in any of the physical structures that exist on the surface of the planet, such as the pyramids or some of the stone circles we discussed in previous conversations, or were they primarily in these cave systems that we see, for example, in the Grand Canyon that are pretty much hidden from us today? But is that primarily where they were living?
Well, we truly want to distinguish again between the ant people that are a hybrid variation of the Andromedans and other Andromedans who have come to Earth in periods of ancient civilizations. Because while the ant people would choose more of the inner Earth and what you might call dense material elemental realities, the Andromedans throughout space and time have certainly co-created and collaborated with many different cosmic races and even humans on various technologies, portals, and pyramids. Mostly, this has been through the assistance of light ships. We have been asked to come in and either support with, again, various measurements or determinations of placement, understanding where in the inner Earth is the most valuable and rich location through which energy flows or resources are available to utilize in the construction of these sites, or in the construction itself, we have been asked to come in and contribute some type of light technology or sound frequency, for example, that would support the alchemy itself. So certainly Andromedans of various dimensions and in various timeframes have been present on planet Earth to support the construction of pyramids and temples. Mostly, however, we would focus our historic assistance in civilizations like Egypt, for example. We have been very prominent in supporting some of the pyramid construction that you might see in locations like Mexico, for example. This has been both beneath the surface in the inner earth as well as above ground in ships.
Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, and just let me create a scenario here and you can tell me if I'm on the right track. Your role as Andromedans wasn't so much in the physical components of these constructions. If, for example, in Egypt, the creation of these stone blocks that were stacked up to create the pyramid, or many of the other structures there, were light ships working with Anunnaki and Thoth and other beings at that time. Reptilian sites around the world we see carved into rock and stone formations and mountains tend to be very intricate and artistic and have lots of stories woven into the architecture. But again, very physical results that we could say that, okay, that structure is reptilian or that structure was Anunnaki. It sounds to me like the Andromedans were more operating behind the scenes, guiding the energetic flow and maybe positions on the earth and ley lines where to place things, but not so much in the physical construction aspects. Is that correct?
That we agree with that. That is correct.
So we wouldn't be able to pinpoint a particular location on the earth and say that was the Andromedans who built that, because they might have actually played a role in many of them, but been more behind the scenes on the energetic level.
This is true. You would not typically see a structure that would be dedicated solely to our architecture or our construction, but that we were more supportive of the original architecture in terms of its location, its energy flow, the resources that it would draw upon, and what type of technological configurations, whether they would come on ships or be present on the earth, were necessary to support the end result.
Okay, along the same lines then, we see many leaders in ancient bloodlines, for example, many of the Egyptian pharaohs, or even many of the reptilian gods who, as one example, in India, many of the gods in the Indian religions were reptilian in nature. Did the Andromedans or the Ant people ever take that kind of a role as far as being part of a leadership bloodline that we would recognize today?
It is not our nature to take on a leadership role very similar to what you are speaking of. So while we may have been present in ancient civilizations and you may have seen us as hybrids in certain communities, it would not necessarily be in a leadership position or one who may have been recognized as such.
Would we attribute the Andromedans to only the Hopis in terms of, you mentioned that it's more of a tribal society, the Andromedan society, and certainly with the Hopis we can see that, but would that also have been an influence in other tribes like various Native American tribes and even tribes in other countries that had that sort of tribal structure to them? Was that all Andromedan influence?
We cannot say it is all, but it is most. So we have been very involved in very early human tribes and tribal communities throughout your globe, and we take great pride in sharing those traditions, also in supporting the understanding of how to connect with the inner earth and the valuable resources that are there.
Now, considering when the Andromedans were in the third dimension, they had more of a flora and fauna, as you said, nature to them. Did they play any role in our ancient understanding and lineage of plant medicine and healing through the use of plants and nature?
We absolutely have, and what we did not add at the very beginning of our conversation about the seeding is that prior to our arrival, there was a request that went out to bring various plants and resources from other dimensions to the earth such that they could hybridize. And there were many elder Andromedans that contributed to this effort, bringing some of the most precious and potent plants to your earth such that they could become what they have today, plant medicines, for example. And training in those was of utmost importance to the elders of Andromeda, because if you are going to hybridize a certain healing plant, reverence for it and integrity in its use would have been of utmost importance. So this, of course, is a part of our history as well.
Now, what about ancient, for example, the Ayurvedic tradition or even Chinese herbal medicine that have some similarities between them? Were these developed by, let's say, the reptilians or the Anunnaki, or was this an Andromedan influence?
There is a fusion here, most definitely, and we cannot take credit for it. But we do want to say that there has been a lot of information that has converged together as one, as these modalities have been translated and shared. Of course, we believe most of them come from the original reptilian influence, but have been added to along the way. When we look at Ayurveda, for example, we're really looking at using the natural substances of earth as medicines, especially the more material and colorful substances that the body resonates with. And this is something that we also work with and revere in Andromeda and have brought to the earth. And we speak with Gaia. So if we are called to work with Gaia as a consciousness, and there are things that Gaia knows are very valuable to the human body, but especially to human consciousness, then naturally we are going to become ambassadors of them. So we call this more of a fusion or a collaborative effort or contribution on behalf of various cosmic races that will say lean more towards the understanding of plant medicines and elementals being of potent use and healing, and especially how to combine them in various tinctures and concoctions to suit what humans need.
Is there any connection with the Druid tribal movement, because they were also very much influenced by nature and plant medicine? Was their influence primarily coming from reptilian orientation, considering it was somewhat of a spiritual religious movement as well, or was there an Andromedan plant medicine connection there?
We don't necessarily see a reptilian influence here. More prominently, Lemurian light teachers coming in and training those in the Druid Society to understand how to work with plants and medicines primarily for enlightenment, at the same time as Andromedans being close to the inner earth, and ambassadors of this training were also involved in this civilization. Not necessarily in physical healing so much. What we really want to point out is that while the Druids are known for using various plants and oils and medicines for healing, this was all born of the understanding of the energy field, which is something that we're very adept at and teach. So much of the Druids' training, in terms of our contribution, came from understanding energetic balance. And if you understand energetic balance, then you absolutely know how to heal the material body.
Did the Andromedans play any role in the development and proliferation of alchemy that eventually blossomed in Egypt and then, of course, was carried forward as an alchemical tradition through many lineages to this day, including the Masonic tradition as well? Was there any influence from them?
We've certainly contributed to this, yet we see alchemy being more born from the technologically focused traditions of the Anunnaki, for example, who were very interested in shifting the form of various elementals into things that were more potent or useful. At the same time, we have our own process of alchemy that would be different than what was what evolved on planet Earth, simply because we weren't necessarily focused on physical technologies to alchemize. Yes, we know your alchemy can be an energetic area of focus, and we would say certainly there were some Andromedans who taught this, both in Egypt and in various other ancient civilizations, but more so, we want to explain that we tend to easily alchemize ourselves as opposed to trying to alchemize something beyond ourselves. So we are more focused on the energetic alchemy of our own bodies as opposed to alchemizing something that the body might need or to change a reality using that alchemy.
Now, did the ant people exist on Earth prior to the Great Flood or since that time?
We have been present prior to and after. As a matter of fact, we have gone through that period of cataclysm within the inner earth, observing some of the changes that have taken place. Because remember, the Great Flood did not happen in all dimensions simultaneously or in the same way, especially within the inner earth.
Well, and maybe I'm remembering this incorrectly, but obviously the Great Flood in the physical form of water flooding the earth didn't take place on all dimensions, but there was a cataclysmic shift that occurred on all dimensions at that time, was there not?
Well, there is a big difference between a cataclysmic shift taking place between all dimensions and the Great Flood having a material effect on every dimension simultaneously. So there were many in the inner earth during this time who took up a home or pilgrimage to preserve themselves and their structures from what was going on the surface of the earth.
I've noticed in my researching ancient civilizations that I come across a lot of, obviously different researchers have different opinions, everything from mainstream academic archaeology to anthropology to the alternative individuals in the space doing their own research as well. And there's a broad range of opinions. Even on the more mainstream side, a lot of those opinions are based on propaganda and things like that, where on the alternative side, there are people doing genuine research based on the information they have available, which quite often is ancient texts, which have lost their meaning over time and been rewritten, of course. But there's a lot of misunderstanding and different opinions on when the Great Flood occurred. Of course, there's the writings of Plato as well that describe around 9,000 years ago was when Atlantis became submerged. But from our discussions in previous conversations here, it seems like Atlantis didn't even exist in the third dimension in the way that Plato would have described it. So it was a ninth dimensional civilization, right? But my question is how, and even there are some researchers of the Anunnaki storylines who believe that the Great Flood occurred about 4,000 years ago, around 2,500 BC, for example, whereas we've been discussing it was more of something that was around 13,000 years ago. Was it that soon in our past, or why all the differences in interpretation in terms of the timeline?
Well, because ultimately you are trying to rectify that an event took place in a linear fashion that you can assimilate to the day that you are standing in today, when in fact, if dimensions truly do exist and events are created within that dimension, and you are standing in one that is completely different, it is impossible for you to make that determination. However, what we will say is that when you refer more to the 13,000 year period, we could say that's a bit more accurate as opposed to the ones that are leaning more towards a recent time, because the Earth is moving so quickly through dimensions, and time is actually moving so fast that where you stand today, believe it or not, can't be measured in the same amount of time or space that we would have in those previous periods, meaning that 13,000 years is actually a bit more accurate when we're looking at space and the way that space operates versus linear time. So we can agree with what you are saying as you present this storyline, as opposed to some of the others that you have mentioned to us here today.
So that's the discrepancy with trying to pinpoint a linear time when these events occurred, such as the Great Flood, is that we're trying to, as human beings, do it from a linear timeline perspective versus a multidimensional perspective. Is that correct?
It is correct. And we know it is frustrating because you believe that time is linear and stagnant, and it is something that you should be able to measure, regardless of whether you are measuring 20,000 years behind or 15 years ahead. But truly, what's happening is how you focus your attention on the experience you are having is a vibrational measurement that the universe does not calculate in linear time. You're trying to put it in the framework of linear time, we know, but ultimately, that linear time based on each individual and where you stand today could be completely different than the measurement that your scientists or researchers are assuming. So can we put it in an estimated time frame based on your linear perspective? Yes, and we would say that all of the changes that have taken place, both dimensionally and in consciousness, considering the time-space difference and where you stand today and when that cataclysm took place, a 13,000 year estimation is pretty close in approximation to what we think is accurate for the purposes of what we are speaking of. But ultimately, what we're trying to move you into is more of an acceptance that in the fifth dimension, time doesn't truly exist. And you're simply creating it based on your attention to it. And it matters not when the memory took place or when the event took place, because the events of the Great Flood and the cataclysm of that time is all existent right now in the experiences that you are drawing back into your reality. That means literally that you're standing within the same time period as those that went through the Great Flood before you. You're just recreating the events in a different speed of vibration. So you're not really moving through linear time. You're actually evolving in an energetic container that is moving you through various experiences for the purpose of recreating them differently. If you do not recreate them any differently, what you're going to find is you're going to mimic the same influences time and time and time again. So we might say that you haven't made any progress at all, and that would be accurate as well, that you're actually within the same cataclysmic period that those who endured the Great Flood went through. It is just that your perception of the events have now matched your consciousness and are being created through your perspective of what this cataclysm truly was.
So in some respects, then what you're saying is that the Great Flood didn't actually occur 13,000 years ago in our linear time, but rather it's happening right now. We're living in that time again.
Exactly, yes.
Okay. Is a reason why we're having these sorts of conversations now. For example, 100 years ago, people were probably not discussing linear time versus multidimensional time. But now in this conversation, for example, we are discussing an idea such as something occurring 13,000 years ago in linear time is happening now. And as you mentioned, as we move to a fifth dimensional consciousness, we are going to change our perception of time. Is that the fact that these topics are being discussed right now and that we're starting to look at ancient archaeology from a multidimensional standpoint versus a linear one because of that fifth dimensional transition that's taking place?
Yes, we agree. You have to begin considering these concepts. And this is why. If you do not, you will be compounded by so much confusing information that it will be very hard to rectify. And we think you'll waste a great deal of time trying to figure out what happened when and how it occurred, when in fact you cannot reason with the laws of the universe. You cannot reason with a shift from a more material dimension into one that is multidimensional. It simply is, it is possible, but it is not something that would ever be beneficial, in other words. So when we offer these explanations, it is not to confuse you or to create a great deal of complexity, but often it is to help you release the resistance that you're holding on to many different storylines that are ultimately connected in some level of truth, but you are wasting a great deal of time attempting to prove is wrong or right, when in fact in multidimensional realities, you are discovering new truths constantly based upon your level of vibration and consciousness, and you will uncover these truths that are necessary in the moment that they are. The work and the effort and the linear time that you put in and energy you contribute to knowing exactly when things happened as a historical account is a very slow speed of vibration and evolution compared to where humanity is going in the future.
In one of our earlier discussions, we discussed about other 13 dimensions in this universe, and the number 13 is very significant in our ancient teachings and even in modern times as well, and also very prominent, for example, in Freemasonry. Is there any connection with that and the fact that this is a cycle that is repeating from 13,000 years ago, that we're again finding ourselves in that same experience?
Well, we could say that the coincidence is ultimately that the universe itself is expanding, and what is required of you for that expansion is being called into account. Meaning, you're simply seeing the synchronicity between what's going on universally and what must happen within your own lives and upon your planet to facilitate that. And each one of us throughout the entire galaxy are having a similar experience of that in our own personal way, because to truly push the expansive boundaries of an intelligent universe, everything and everyone within that universe must also push their boundaries. So whether yours is on time or the ability to work with energy, or looking back on things that you have decided are a certain way that now must change, these are the things that are being asked of you in order to move into that higher state of universal expansion.
Thank you. And thank you, Micheila. And thank you all for joining us for another Channel Revelations. We'll be back again next week with another Awaken Empowered podcast. And as always, you can find us on many platforms, including podcast platforms and video platforms like Rumble. So we'll see you in another week.